It was supposed to be just another cold December night in Los Angeles. Nobody in that stadium knew they were about to watch the moment that would flip an entire dynasty upside go completely silent. And in that 1 second, the team that had ruled professional football for years suddenly had a giant question mark hanging over its head. But here's the part that nobody expected. What of this video, you're going to understand exactly why people are calling this the most interesting turn the Kansas City Chiefs have taken in a decade. Let's rewind for a second, because to understand how big this moment really is, you have to understand what this team was before it happened. 4 years, the Kansas City Chiefs were the team everybody else in the league was chasing. Season after season, they showed up in the biggest games of the year. They won champ measured itself against. At the center of it all was one guy. A quarterback who threw the ball like he was playing a completely different sport than everyone else on the field. Somebody who could see plays develop before they even happened, who could throw a pass sidearm, off his back foot, across his body, and still drop it right into a receiver's hands like it was nothing. He wasn't just good. He was the kind of player that only comes along once in a generation, and for years, it felt like nothing could touch him. Behind him was a coach who tough, physical players who bought into a culture of winning. And together, they didn't just win once. They built a streak. Division titles, year after year after year. Deep playoff runs that felt almost routine, even though every team in the league would kill for just one of them. It felt, for a long stretch of time, like this team simply did not lose big games. Not really. Not when it mattered. But football has a cruel way of reminding everyone that nothing lasts forever. And heading into the most recent season, there were already small cracks starting to show. The offensive line wasn't quite what it used to be. The receiver room, once stacked with playmakers, had thinned out and left fans nervous every time the ball was in the air. There were whispers, quiet ones at first, that maybe, just maybe, the window was starting to close. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. Not with a roster that still had that same legendary quarterback under center. Not with that same brilliant coach calling plays. Surely, people thought, this team finds a way. They always find a way. And for a while, it looked like maybe they would. The season had its ups and downs, the kind of stretch that makes fans nervous but not panicked. Wins that felt hard-fought. Losses that felt like they could be fixed. Every week, there was this lingering sense that the switch could flip at any moment, that this team, with this quarterback, was never truly out of anything. That belief carried through the fall and into the heart of winter. And then came a night in mid-December that changed absolutely everything. The Chiefs were on the road, deep into their 15th week of the season, facing a divisional rival that had been nipping at their heels all year. It wasn't just a normal game. Playoff positioning was on the line. Every possession mattered. Every read, every throw, every scramble carried weight, because this wasn't a team that could afford to slip. The game was tight, the kind of tight where every fan is glued to their screen, stomach in knots, praying for one more big play to swing the momentum. And then it happened. In the final minutes of a game that was already slipping away, the quarterback dropped back, looking for an answer, looking for anything, the way he always had 1,000 times before. But this time, as he planted to move, something in his knee gave out. It wasn't a violent hit. It wasn't a defender crashing into him from the side. It was almost worse than that, because it was just his own body, betraying him in an instant, on a play that should have been routine. He went down. And the second he hit the turf, everyone watching knew, in their gut, that this wasn't a normal injury. The training staff rushed out. The stadium went quiet in that strange way stadiums go quiet, where thousands of people all seem to hold their breath at the exact same moment. He was helped off the field, and just like that, the game and the season, and maybe an entire era, felt like it had shifted beneath everyone's feet. The diagnosis came fast, and it was brutal. Torn ligaments in his left knee, serious enough to require surgery almost immediately. This wasn't a tweak. This wasn't a bruise he could play through with a brace and some grit. This was the kind of injury that ends seasons and tests careers. Surgery was scheduled within a day. And for a franchise that had built its entire identity around having the best quarterback on the planet, the sudden reality of playing meaningful football without him hit like a truck. The losses piled up after that. Without their franchise player, the offense sputtered. The magic that had carried them through so many close games simply wasn't there anymore. And when the dust settled at the end of the season, The numbers told a story that felt almost impossible to believe for anyone who had watched this team dominate for so long. A losing record. A missed playoff appearance, the first time that had happened to this quarterback in his entire career as a starter. And maybe the most jarring stat of all, a streak of division championships that had stretched on for nearly a decade, suddenly snapped, broken, gone. The Chiefs didn't just miss the playoffs. They finished near the bottom of their own division, a sentence that would have sounded absolutely absurd just 1 year earlier. For a fan base that had gotten used to celebrating in January, this was a gut punch unlike anything they'd felt in years. There were hard conversations. There were questions about the roster, about the coaching staff, about whether this dynasty had quietly run its course while everyone was still busy admiring the trophies on the shelf. Sports commentators everywhere started asking the same uncomfortable question. Was this the end? But here's where the story takes its first real turn, because instead of collapsing into panic, the front office did something interesting. They didn't blow the whole thing up. They didn't trade away their franchise quarterback or fire their legendary coach. Instead, they made a series of calculated moves designed to bridge the gap between an uncertain present and a hopeful future. The first big move was almost symbolic in how much it said about their plan. They traded for a quarterback who had already tasted both the highs and lows of the league, a talented, athletic passer who had bounced around a bit but still had the physical tools to start games if needed. Bringing him in wasn't about replacing their franchise star. It was about protection. Insurance. A safety net in case the recovery took longer than anyone hoped. It sent a clear message. The front office believed their quarterback was coming back. They just weren't sure exactly when, and they weren't going to leave that to chance. Then came the draft, and with it, another fascinating twist. The team used one of their picks on a young quarterback out of a major college program, a prospect known for his arm talent and his poise in big moments. On the surface, drafting a quarterback right after your franchise passer suffers a devastating knee injury might look like a red flag, like maybe the front office was quietly preparing for life after their star. But dig a little deeper, and it looked more like exactly what a smart, forward-thinking organization does. Build depth. Create competition. Make sure that no matter what happens on that field, the team is never caught off guard again. While all of this roster building was happening in the background, the real story, the one capturing everyone's attention, was happening in a training room, day after day, quietly, out of the spotlight, where a two-time most valuable player was fighting to get his career back. Recovering from a torn ACL and a torn ligament on the outside of the knee is no small thing. Doctors will tell you the timeline for a return like that typically stretches somewhere between 9 months and a full year. It's not just about healing the joint. It's about rebuilding strength, rebuilding explosiveness, rebuilding the kind of trust in your own body that lets an athlete plant his foot and throw without a flicker of hesitation. For a normal person, that recovery is already an uphill climb. For an elite athlete whose entire game depends on quick feet and split-second movement, it's even more demanding. And yet, almost from the very beginning, something started to feel different about this recovery. The updates coming out of the organization weren't cautious or vague the way these things usually are. They were confident. Enthusiastic, even. The team's general manager, someone who had been around this quarterback since he was a rookie, someone who had watched him fight back from injuries before, started dropping hints that this recovery was going faster than anyone expected. He talked about how the quarterback attacked his rehab every single day, showing up in the training facility constantly, refusing to take shortcuts, refusing to slow down even when the coaching staff wanted him to. He compared it to a similar moment years earlier, when a different knee injury threatened to derail his career early on, and instead, he came back in a matter of weeks and looked better than before. By springtime, the quarterback himself was speaking publicly about his progress, and the tone was cautiously optimistic. He described the rehab as relentless, difficult, the kind of process that tests not just your body but your patience. But he also made it clear that he was hitting every checkpoint the doctors had laid out for him. He was already doing light throwing work. He was already participating, in a limited capacity, in some of the team's off-season practices. For a guy who suffered a major knee reconstruction just months earlier, being on the practice field at all, even in a reduced role, felt like a small miracle. As the weeks rolled on, the updates kept getting better. He moved from simple throwing drills into actual 7-on-7 work, tossing passes into tight coverage windows, moving around in the pocket, doing the things that make him who he is on a football field. Every report from inside the building painted the same picture. He wasn't just recovering. He was recovering ahead of schedule, blowing past the timelines that doctors usually set for this kind of injury. Now, here's the twist within the twist, the part of the story that adds an extra layer of tension. Being ahead of schedule creates a strange kind of problem. Because now, the biggest challenge isn't whether he'll be ready. It's making sure he doesn't push himself too hard, too fast. The coaching staff has been open about this. Their biggest fear isn't the knee itself failing to heal properly. It's the quarterback's own competitive drive overriding caution. This is a guy who has never wanted to sit out a single game in his entire career if he could help it. A guy who, by his own admission, hates missing time on the field more than almost anything else in the world. So as encouraging as the ahead-of-schedule updates have been, the organization has had to walk a careful line, celebrating the progress while also gently pumping the brakes, because they know exactly how badly their franchise player wants to be back out there. As spring turned into early summer, the anticipation kept building. Every single practice update became a headline. Every video clip of him throwing a deep ball, every photo of him jogging without a limp, every quote from a teammate about how sharp he looked, it all got dissected and analyzed by a fan base desperate for good news after such a painful season. And slowly, the conversation around this team started to shift. It stopped being about whether the dynasty was over. It started being about whether this might be one of the great comeback stories in recent sports history. Think about it for a second. This isn't just a guy trying to get back on the field. This is a guy who has already won multiple championships, already been named the most valuable player in his league more than once, already built a resume that puts him in conversations with the greatest to ever play his position. And now, he's facing arguably the biggest test of his career, not against an opposing defense, but against his own body, against doubt, against a clock that most people thought would keep him out for the better part of an entire year. And the timing of all of this could not be more dramatic. Because as the calendar creeps closer to the start of a brand new season, the schedule makers have set up a season opener that feels almost too perfectly written for this exact storyline. The Chiefs will open their year at home, under the lights, in front of their own fans, against the very team that took the division crown away from them the year everything fell apart. It's the kind of matchup that writes itself. The defending division champion, the team that capitalized while the old dynasty stumbled, coming into that building to open the new season, right as the face of that dynasty potentially makes his return from one of the scariest injuries a quarterback can suffer. If he's out there for that opening kickoff, in front of a sold-out crowd, in the building where he's authored so many unforgettable moments, it won't just be a football game. It will be a statement. A message to the rest of the league that the obituaries written for this team last season were premature. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because this story isn't just about one player, even if he's the headline. There's a whole supporting cast whose fortunes are tied to how this season plays out, and their stories add even more layers to this unfolding drama. Take the running back room, for example. In the offseason, the front office made a big splash by bringing in a running back who had just come off winning the biggest individual honor a player can earn in the championship game. Adding a player with that kind of pedigree wasn't just about adding talent. It was about changing the identity of the offense. For years, this team lived and died by the arm of their quarterback, by his ability to create something out of nothing when a play broke down. But an offense that leans too heavily on one player, especially one recovering from a major injury, is a fragile offense. So this offseason, there's been a clear and intentional push to build a stronger running game, to take some of the pressure off the quarterback's shoulders as he works his way back into form, and to give the offense a physical, punishing identity that can win games even on nights when the passing attack isn't clicking. Then there's the tight end, a player who has quietly become one of the most decorated at his position in the history of the sport. He's entering what many believe could be his final season, a farewell tour of sorts for a player who has been a security blanket for that same quarterback for over a decade. Every reception now feels a little more meaningful, a little more historic, as fans wonder just how many more times they'll get to watch this particular connection work its magic on a football field. His story adds an emotional undercurrent to everything else happening around the team, a sense that this season might be the last dance for one of the most iconic quarterback and tight end duos the game has ever seen. Meanwhile, off the field, there's been an entirely different kind of storyline swirling around this same tight end, one that has nothing to do with football but has captured just as much attention. Reports and rumors about a highly anticipated wedding involving him and his internationally famous partner have been dominating headlines all off-season, with speculation swirling about extravagant plans and a guest list that reads like a who's who of entertainment and sports. It's added this strange, almost surreal layer to the whole season, where fans are simultaneously tracking recovery updates on a torn knee ligament and wedding planning rumors involving one of the most famous couples on the planet. It's honestly one of the more unusual dynamics in recent memory, football and pop culture colliding in a way that makes this off-season feel unlike any other. Back on the football side of things, there are still real questions that this team has to answer before anyone crowns them contenders again. The wide receiver room remains a point of concern for a lot of people who follow this team closely. After some disappointing seasons from key pass catchers, there's genuine uncertainty about whether this group has enough firepower to fully support their quarterback once he's back to full strength. Some of the team's young receivers have shown flashes of real talent, but flashes aren't the same as consistency, and consistency is exactly what this offense is going to need if it wants to get back to the mountaintop. The offensive line, too, has been a work in progress. Protecting a quarterback who is coming off a major knee surgery isn't just important, it's absolutely critical. One bad hit at the wrong angle could set the entire recovery back, or worse. So the coaching staff has been putting a heavy emphasis on rebuilding that unit, testing out different combinations up front, trying to find the right group of linemen who can give their franchise quarterback the kind of protection he's going to need as he shakes off the rust and works his way back to elite form. On defense, there's been quiet optimism. The front office made moves to add experienced pass rushers and shore up areas that had been weaknesses in years past. Veteran leadership has been added to a linebacker core that already had some promising young pieces, and there's a sense inside the building that this defense could end up being the backbone of the team while the offense finds its footing again around a returning quarterback. All of these threads, the injury, the recovery, the roster moves, the emotional storylines swirling around key players, they're all weaving together into one of the most compelling storylines in the entire league heading into this new season. And that's really the heart of why this turn has become so fascinating to so many people. This isn't a simple story. It's not just injury, recovery, comeback, done. It's layered. It's uncertain. It's filled with question marks that won't get answered until real games are actually played. Will the quarterback truly be ready for that opening kickoff? Will his body hold up once real hits start coming, once defenders who don't care about storylines start targeting that surgically repaired knee? Will the front office's aggressive off-season moves, the running back, the veteran defenders, the quarterback insurance policy they traded for, will all of that be enough to support a team trying to climb back to the top of a conference that didn't wait around for them while they were down? There's also a bigger, more philosophical question hanging over all of this. Dynasties in professional sports don't usually get second chances. Once a team starts slipping, once the cracks start showing, history tells us it's usually the beginning of a longer decline, not a temporary blip before a triumphant return. Father Time is undefeated, as they say, and even the greatest athletes eventually run into a wall they can't push through. So when this team's fans dare to dream about a big comeback season, there's always that nagging voice in the back of their minds, whispering that maybe, just maybe, last season wasn't a fluke. Maybe it was the start of something they don't want to admit. But then you look at the counter-argument, and it's just as compelling. This isn't a team that's aging out gracefully or clearly out of talent. This is a team that lost its best player to a fluke, non-contact injury in the middle of a game, and everything that happened after that, the losing streak, the missed playoffs, the broken division streak, all of it can be traced back to that single moment on a December night. Take that injury out of the equation, and who knows how differently that season plays out. So there's a real, legitimate argument that this wasn't a team in decline. It was a great team that got unlucky at the worst possible time, and now, with their star player reportedly ahead of schedule and roaring back toward full health, there's every reason to believe they could look like their old selves again, and fast. That tension, that uncertainty, that push and pull between doubt and hope, is exactly what makes this such a gripping story to follow right now. It's not a finished narrative with a clean, tidy ending. It's a story still being written, week by week, practice by practice, update by update. Every time a new report comes out about how the quarterback looked in practice, fans and analysts pore over every detail like it's breaking news, because in a very real sense, it is. The stakes are that high. The uncertainty is that real. As training camp approaches, all eyes will be on that practice field in the summer heat. Every rep the quarterback takes, every throw, every scramble, every hit he absorbs or manages to avoid, will be scrutinized like never before. Is he moving the same way he used to? Is there any hesitation in his footwork? Is he trusting that knee the way he trusted it before all of this happened? These are the questions coaches, teammates, and millions of fans will be asking themselves every single day leading up to that opening kickoff. And when that season finally does kick off, when the lights come on and the crowd roars and the ball is finally snapped for real, with actual stakes on the line, that's when we'll finally get our answer. Is this the beginning of one of the great redemption stories in modern sports? Or is it the continuation of a difficult chapter that this once dominant franchise is still trying to write its way out of? Nobody knows for certain yet. Not the doctors. Not the coaches. Not even the quarterback himself, no matter how confident he sounds in interviews. Recovery from an injury like this is never a perfectly straight line. There will be good days and difficult days between now and that first snap of the season. There will be moments of doubt mixed in with moments of genuine excitement. That's simply the nature of a comeback this significant, this closely watched, and this high stakes. What we do know is this. A team that many were ready to write off just a few months ago has spent this entire offseason quietly, methodically building itself back up. They've added talent at key positions. They've built in depth and insurance at the most important position on the field. And at the very center of it all, their franchise quarterback, the same player who redefined what it means to be dominant at his position, has spent every single day since that devastating injury fighting his way back, not just to be on the field again, but to be the same player, if not an even better one, than the man who went down on that cold December night. If he walks out onto that field for the season opener, healthy, confident, and ready to play, it will be one of the most remarkable turnarounds in recent memory. A player who suffered a serious knee injury just months earlier, standing tall under the lights, ready to lead his team back into the fight, back into contention, back to the top of a conference that thought it had already moved past them. And if that happens, if this story does end the way so many people are hoping it will, we won't just be talking about a football team bouncing back from a rough season. We'll be talking about one of the great individual comeback stories in the history of the sport, a reminder that even the most dominant dynasties can hit a wall, stumble, and still find a way to climb back up when everyone else has already counted them out. So keep your eyes on this story, because it isn't over yet. In fact, it feels like we're only just getting to the most interesting part. The recovery updates will keep coming. The roster battles will keep playing out. The questions about whether this team can truly return to the top will keep swirling all summer long. But one thing is already clear. What started as a devastating injury on an otherwise unremarkable December night has turned into one of the most captivating storylines in all of sports, a story about resilience, about doubt, about the fine line between the end of an era and the start of a legendary comeback. And when that season opener finally arrives, when the ball is kicked off and the lights shine down on that field, everyone watching will finally get to see whether this incredible turn of events was the beginning of a fall, or the beginning of one of the greatest comeback chapters this sport has ever told. Let's talk for a moment about the man calling the shots on the sideline, because his story matters just as much in all of this. This head coach has already built one of the most decorated careers in the history of the sport, spanning decades, multiple franchises, and a coaching tree that has spread across the entire league. He's the kind of coach who has nothing left to prove, someone who could walk away right now and still be remembered as one of the all-time greats. And yet, there he was, all off-season, in the building every single day, working through this crisis right alongside his quarterback. There have even been quiet questions swirling about how many more seasons he plans to coach, whispers about whether this stretch of adversity might be one of his final chapters before eventually stepping away and handing the reins to someone else. If that's true, if this really is one of the final rides for a coach of his caliber, it adds yet another layer of urgency to this whole story. A legendary coach, a legendary quarterback, both trying to prove, one more time, that they still have what it takes to get back to the top together. It's also worth remembering just how unforgiving the landscape around this team has become. The conference they play in isn't the same as it was several years ago, back when this team could seemingly coast through the regular season and simply flip a switch once the games mattered most. Now, there are multiple serious contenders, hungry young teams with their own rising stars, teams that spent the last season proving they could hang with anybody, including the very team that used to sit alone at the top. The division rival who stole that crown away last season isn't just some fluke champion either. They built a genuinely talented roster, and they're not going to hand that title back without a fight. So even if the quarterback comes back looking exactly like his old self, there's no guarantee that alone is enough. The path back to the top just got a whole lot more crowded, and that reality is part of what makes this comeback story so tense to watch unfold. It's not simply a matter of getting healthy. It's a matter of getting healthy while every other contender in the conference is also getting stronger, faster, and hungrier. There's also a quieter, less flashy storyline developing on the offensive front that deserves attention, because championships aren't just won by star quarterbacks and highlight reel throws. They're won up front, in the trenches, by the players whose names rarely trend on social media but whose performance decides whether a franchise quarterback gets crushed on third down or has all day to find an open target. This offseason, the competition along that offensive line has been fierce, with several young players fighting for starting spots, some of them former high draft picks who struggled through difficult rookie seasons and are now looking to prove that last year's growing pains were simply part of the process, not a permanent ceiling on what they can become. Watching those battles play out through the summer will tell us just as much about this team's ceiling as any update on the quarterback's knee will. And then there's the emotional gravity of the locker room itself. Teams that go through a season like the one this franchise just endured don't just lose games, they lose something harder to measure. Confidence. Swagger. That quiet certainty that used to walk into every stadium with them, the sense that no matter the score, no matter the situation, they were still the team to beat. Rebuilding that isn't something you can simply draft or sign in free agency. It has to be earned back, one practice, one preseason snap, one regular season win at a time. Players who have been in that building through both the highest highs and the lowest lows of the past several years talk about this offseason differently than previous ones. There's a hunger to it, an edge that wasn't quite there in years when winning felt almost automatic. Adversity has a strange way of either breaking a team apart or forging it into something tougher than before, and everyone connected to this franchise is hoping, desperately, that it's the second one. Think back for a second to how sports history remembers these kinds of moments. Every legendary dynasty eventually faces a season like this, one that makes fans and analysts alike start writing the obituary a little too early. Some teams never recover from it. The decline continues, the roster ages out, and the storyline quietly fades from the headlines a year or two later. But other teams use that exact moment as the spark for something even greater than what came before, a humbling experience that resets the hunger, tightens the culture, and sets the stage for another run at glory. Nobody knows yet which version of this story the Chiefs are going to write. But every single piece of evidence from this offseason, the aggressive roster moves, the shockingly fast recovery updates, the quiet determination radiating out of that quarterback every time he speaks to reporters, suggests that this organization is doing everything humanly possible to make sure they land on the right side of that history. There's a symmetry to all of this that almost feels too perfect to be real. A quarterback who built his legacy on late-game heroics, on somehow finding a way to win when everything seemed stacked against him, now finds himself in the biggest late-game situation of his entire career, except this time, the clock ticking down isn't on a scoreboard. It's on a recovery timeline, on a body trying to heal faster than medicine typically allows, on a season opener circled on every calendar in that building. If there's one thing this player has proven, over and over again, across an entire career full of improbable finishes, it's that betting against him tends to be a losing proposition. Every time people thought he was cornered, every time a defense thought they had him trapped, he found some impossible way out. Maybe, just maybe, that same stubborn, relentless refusal to accept defeat is exactly what's fueling this recovery behind the scenes. Of course, none of this guarantees a happy ending. Football, and sports in general, rarely follow a script, no matter how compelling the storyline looks on paper. Injuries can linger. Setbacks can happen without warning. A single bad practice, a single awkward step during a routine drill, could completely change the tone of this entire narrative overnight. That uncertainty, uncomfortable as it is part of what makes this story so gripping to follow in real time. There's no guaranteed happy ending here. There's no scriptwriter ensuring the hero walks away victorious in the end. There's only a team, a coach, and a quarterback, doing everything within their power to control what they can control, and hoping the rest falls into place when it matters most. As the summer stretches on and training camp inches closer, expect this story to only get bigger. Every practice report will be picked apart. Every video clip of a deep throw or a designed rollout will be replayed frame by fans desperate for reassurance. Every small setback, even a minor one, will spark waves of worry across message boards and social media feeds. And every good update, every sign of explosive movement, every report of him looking like his old self again, will send that same fan base soaring right back into cautious optimism. That emotional roller coaster, as exhausting as it might be for the people living through it, is exactly why this has become one of the most talked about storylines in the entire league heading into the new season. So here's where we leave things, for now. A dynasty that looked, for one dark stretch of a season, like it might be quietly fading into history, has spent an entire off-season fighting its way back toward relevance, toward contention, toward one more shot at glory. A franchise quarterback who suffered one of the scariest injuries in football has defied almost every expectation set for his recovery, moving faster, working harder, and sounding more confident with every single update that comes out of that building. A front office that could have panicked and torn everything down instead made smart, calculated moves designed to protect their investment while building depth around it. And a fan base that spent months bracing for the worst is now, cautiously, carefully, allowing themselves to believe in something bigger again. Nobody knows exactly how this chapter ends. Maybe it's a triumphant return, a healthy quarterback marching his team right back to the top of the conference, proving every doubter wrong along the way. Maybe there are more bumps in the road first, more tests of patience before anything resembling the old glory returns. But whichever way this story unfolds, one thing has already become impossible to deny. What started as one of the most devastating injuries in recent football memory has transformed, almost overnight, into one of the most fascinating comeback stories the sport has seen in years. And when that season opener finally kicks off, with the lights shining, the crowd roaring, and a healthy quarterback potentially standing tall in that pocket once again, everyone watching will understand exactly why this turn of events became must-watch television for football fans everywhere. Nobody saw this particular twist coming. And now that it's here, unfolding in real time, absolutely nobody can afford to look away. That the team chasing history would lose to their most hated rivals not once, but twice. That the streak everyone thought would never end, would end. And that a franchise built on dynasty, on parades, on confetti falling over downtown Kansas City year after year, would finish with a losing record for the first time since 2012. You wouldn't believe it. Nobody would have believed it. But it happened. And to understand how one of the greatest runs in NFL history came crashing down in a single season, you have to go back to the beginning of 2025, back when nobody, not the players, not the coaches, not a single person wearing red and gold, saw any of this coming. For 9 straight years, the Kansas City Chiefs had ruled the AFC West. 9 division titles in a row. 5 trips to the Super Bowl in 6 seasons. 3 championships. A quarterback in Patrick Mahomes who redefined what the position could look like, throwing sidearm darts across his body, no-look passes that shouldn't exist, escaping pressure that would have buried any other player. A head coach in Andy Reid, a man who had already built one of the great coaching legacies in football history, still hungry, still scheming, still finding ways to win. This wasn't a team. This was an empire. And empires, as history has shown time and time again, don't fall quietly. They fall in ways that feel almost impossible until you're standing in the wreckage, looking back, wondering how you didn't see the cracks forming. The 2025 season started with hope, like it always does. Expectations were sky high, the way they always are in Kansas City. But almost immediately, something felt different. In Week 1, the Chiefs lost to the Los Angeles Chargers, a team they had dominated for years. It was a one-score game, the kind of loss you shake off in September, the kind you tell yourself doesn't mean anything yet. Nobody panicked. Not after one game. Not when you've won 3 of the last 6 Super Bowls. But if you looked closely, if you really paid attention to the way that game slipped away, there was something unsettling underneath it. A missed extra point. A defense that couldn't quite finish. A feeling, faint but real, that this team wasn't quite the same as the one that had steamrolled the league for the better part of a decade. Through the next few weeks, the Chiefs looked like a team searching for its old self and not quite finding it. There were flashes of brilliance because of course this was still Patrick Mahomes we were talking about. Against the Baltimore Ravens, Kansas City looked every bit like the team that had haunted the AFC for years, dominating from start to finish, improving to 2 wins and 2 losses. Mahomes even reached a milestone in that stretch, becoming the fastest player in NFL history to throw 300 career touchdown passes, a number that took most legends a decade or more to reach. For a moment, it felt like maybe the slow start was just that. A slow start. Nothing more. But then came Jacksonville. A team the Chiefs had beaten 8 straight times. A team Mahomes had never lost to in his entire career. And in a game nobody expected to be close, the Jaguars pulled off the upset, snapping that streak and handing Mahomes the first loss of his career against that franchise. The Chiefs fell to 2 wins and 3 losses, their worst start in years. And worse than the record itself was the way it happened. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't bad luck. It was a team that kept finding new and creative ways to lose games it should have won. If you go back and watch the tape from that stretch of the season, you start to notice a pattern, the kind of pattern that doesn't show up in a single game but becomes impossible to ignore over the course of months. The Chiefs kept playing close games. Painfully close games. Games decided by a field goal, sometimes less. And more often than not, they were losing them. It's one thing to lose a blowout. You tell yourself the other team was simply better that day. But losing over and over again in games that come down to the final possession, the final kick, the final inches, that eats at a team. It eats at a locker room. It eats at the belief that has carried a dynasty through year after year of pressure. There was a night in November that captured everything wrong with this Chiefs season in one single sequence. Kansas City was on the road against the Denver Broncos, a team they had owned for over a decade. On the opening drive, everything seemed to be clicking. First down. Momentum building. And then, 3 plays in a row, receivers stood wide open, the kind of open that should end in a touchdown, the kind of open that Mahomes had converted into highlight reels 1,000 times before. Xavier Worthy, uncovered, streaking toward the end zone. Overthrown. Another receiver, wide open. Missed. A third chance, gone just as fast as the first 2. The Chiefs would go on to lose that game by exactly 3 points. 3 points that could have been erased by a single connected pass on that opening drive. It wasn't the defense that failed them that night. It wasn't the coaching. It was simply a team that could not find a way to finish, no matter how many chances the football gods handed them. And then there was the kicking game, a part of football that fans love to overlook until it costs them everything. Harrison Butker, a 3-time Super Bowl champion, a kicker who had been automatic in the biggest moments of the biggest games in franchise history, suddenly couldn't find his rhythm. Missed field goals. Missed extra points. Not in garbage time, not when the outcome was already decided, but in the moments that mattered most. A missed extra point in a tight loss to the Chargers in Week 1. Another missed extra point in that heartbreaking loss to Denver. A missed 43-yard field goal in the final minute against Houston, in a game the Chiefs desperately needed. Individually, you could excuse any one of these. Kickers miss sometimes. That's football. But stacked together, game after game, they became something bigger than bad luck. They became a symbol of a season that simply could not catch a break, no matter how hard it tried. There was another game in early October against the Jacksonville Jaguars that deserves its own moment in this story, not because of what happened on the field this time, but because of what it represented for a team desperately searching for any sign of its old identity. The Chiefs delivered a shutout win that day, their first regular season shutout victory in over a decade, and for 1 week, it felt like the storm might be passing. Fans allowed themselves to believe again. Analysts started walking back their early season concerns. Maybe this was the week everything clicked back into place. But football has a way of punishing hope before it fully forms, and the very next week, against the Buffalo Bills, Mahomes turned in one of the worst statistical performances of his entire career, completing under 45% of his passes and throwing an interception in a game that reminded everyone just how fragile this season's foundation truly was. One great week, followed immediately by one of the worst, became something of a theme for this Chiefs team all year long. Just enough magic to keep hope alive, just enough disaster to make sure that hope never lasted more than 7 days. Then came a stretch in the middle of the season that might be the most telling of all, a run of games against the Washington Commanders and other middling opponents where Kansas City actually looked like themselves again, improving to 5 wins and 3 losses, extending a long winning streak against Washington that stretched back nearly a decade. For a brief moment, the Chiefs sat right at the edge of the playoff picture, close enough to see it, close enough to believe a late-season surge could carry them back into familiar territory. This is usually where a team like Kansas City, a team built on championship pedigree, finds another gear. This is usually where Mahomes takes over a season and refuses to let it slip away. Instead, what followed was arguably the most painful stretch of football this franchise had experienced in over a decade, a collapse within the collapse, where every single close game the team had somehow been finding ways to lose all season long finally caught up with the record all at once. It's worth sitting with that Denver game for a moment longer, because it really was a microcosm of the entire season compressed into 60 minutes. 3 wide-open receivers on 3 consecutive plays, 3 missed opportunities, and a 3-point loss at the final whistle. If you're looking for the exact moment when a fan base collectively started to feel that dread, that sinking realization that this year was different, that this wasn't just a slow start about to turn around, that game in Denver might be it. Because it wasn't a case of the other team playing lights-out defense. It wasn't a case of overwhelming pressure forcing bad decisions. It was simply misses. Uncontested, wide open, should-have-been touchdown misses, from arguably the most accurate deep ball thrower of his generation. When the best player on your team starts missing the throws that made him the best player on your team, that's when you know something deeper is happening, something beyond just a bad bounce or an unlucky week. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, something had shifted in the way people talked about this Chiefs team. The words dynasty and empire had quietly disappeared from the conversation, replaced by words like disappointing and underachieving, and even, for the first time in over a decade, rebuild. Kansas City hosted the Dallas Cowboys on Thanksgiving Day, a game watched by tens of millions of people across the country, a game that used to be a showcase for greatness. Instead, it became another data point in a season quietly unraveling in front of a national audience. Here's the thing about a team in decline. It rarely announces itself all at once. It creeps in. A missed kick here. A blown coverage there. A quarterback who, for the first time in his career, starts missing throws he used to make in his sleep. And by the time everyone notices, by the time the record finally tells the story the tape had been telling for weeks, it feels sudden. It feels shocking. But it was building the entire time, brick by brick, loss by loss, until the foundation that had carried this franchise through nearly a decade of dominance simply gave way. The defense told its own quiet story of decline as well. On paper, it looked fine, even good. Kansas City ranked among the best teams in the league in points allowed and yards allowed. But football isn't played on paper, and if you actually watched these games unfold, you noticed something the statistics didn't capture. The Chiefs simply could not pressure opposing quarterbacks. Chris Jones, one of the most dominant interior defensive linemen in the league, carried an enormous share of the load, alongside George Karlaftis on the edge. But outside of those two, there was almost nothing. No consistent pass rush threat. No player who made opposing quarterbacks uncomfortable in the pocket. And in the NFL, when you can't get to the quarterback, eventually, no matter how well you cover, someone finds a way to hurt you. Week 11 against Denver had been a warning sign. Week 14 against Houston delivered the final blow to any realistic playoff hope. The Chiefs lost that game 20-10, and while Chris Jones battled all night, wreaking havoc in the Texans' backfield, it simply wasn't enough. Some losses feel like moments. This one felt like an ending, where things finally turned. The Chiefs built a 10-point lead heading into halftime. There was even a defensive interception that seemed to swing more momentum their way. And then, on a play that will haunt Chiefs' kingdom for years, Patrick Mahomes scrambled outside the pocket, trying to make one more play, trying to do what he had always done, will his team to victory through pure improvisation and grit. And his leg gave out beneath him. It didn't look catastrophic in the moment. These things rarely do. He walked off, or at least tried to. But something was wrong, everyone could see it, and the silence that fell over the stadium told its own story before any doctor or reporter said a word. Later, an MRI confirmed the worst possible outcome. A torn ACL. Season over. Not just for that game. Not just for the playoff push. For the entire year. Think about what that means for a franchise built so completely around one player. Patrick Mahomes wasn't just the quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs. He was the engine, the heartbeat, the single variable that made every single game, no matter how ugly, feel winnable. And in one instant, on one scramble, in a game that had already been effectively meaningless in the standings, that heartbeat stopped. Undergoing surgery that very same night, mere hours after the injury happened, Mahomes made a promise to the fans and to himself. He would attack every single day of his recovery. He would come back stronger than ever. But promises, no matter how sincere, don't change what was left of this season. With Mahomes gone, the Chiefs turned to backup quarterback Gardner Minshew, a serviceable veteran, a guy who had started games before and knew how to manage an offense. But football has a cruel sense of humor sometimes, and just one game later, Minshew went down too, a knee injury ending his season as well. Which meant Kansas City, a franchise that had played in 5 of the last 6 Super Bowls, was now forced to turn to its third-string quarterback, a virtually unknown player named Chris Oladikin, to close out the final 2 games of the season. Picture that for a moment. A team built to compete for championships, forced to start a third-string quarterback nobody outside of Kansas City had ever heard of, in the final stretch of what was already a lost season. It wasn't just symbolic. It was almost poetic, in the cruelest possible way. The Chiefs' season had gone from Super Bowl contender to complete organizational collapse in a matter of weeks. The final 2 games played out exactly the way you'd expect. Losses. The kind of losses that no longer even carried the sting of disappointment, because by that point, everyone, players, coaches, fans, had already accepted what this season had become. Kansas City closed out the year on a 6-game losing streak, a stretch of football that would have been unthinkable to predict back in September, when this team still carried championship aspirations on its shoulders. When the final whistle blew on the season, the numbers told a story that felt almost unbelievable given everything this franchise had accomplished over the previous decade. 6 wins. 11 losses. A losing record, the first one this team had posted since 2012, back before Mahomes had even been drafted, back before Andy Reid had built this dynasty from the ground up. 9 of those 11 losses came by 1 possession. Think about that. This wasn't a team that got blown out week after week. This was a team that kept finding itself in position to win, and kept finding new ways to let it slip away. And then there were the numbers that cut even deeper for a fan base that had grown accustomed to dominance. For the first time since 2014, the Chiefs missed the playoffs entirely. For the first time since 2013, they were swept by the Chargers, losing both matchups in a single season. And for the first time since the 2014 Broncos team pulled it off, Kansas City was swept by a division rival, in this case losing both games to Denver as well. The Chiefs finished 1-5 within the AFC West, a division they had utterly dominated for nearly a decade. 1 win. 5 losses. Against teams they used to beat in their sleep. Even the home and away splits told a painful story. Kansas City managed to go 5-4 at home, still not great, but survivable. On the road, though, the record was almost impossible to comprehend for a team of this pedigree. 1 win. 7 losses. The Road Warriors, who had once marched through hostile stadiums during playoff runs, silencing crowds with pure competitive will, simply could not find a way to win away from Arrowhead all season long.